Hello again, and welcome back to Bite Size Kierkegaard. If you're joining me for the first time, do follow the links in the description for a nicer introduction. Otherwise, I'm going to launch right into this. As is my tradition with this series, I'm doing bookmarks that my grandma passed on to me when she passed on. Pun not intended. Really bad taste. I apologize. But yeah, so this is today's is Greece, which is try to get the facial detection to stop doing its thing. But yeah, my grandma actually, she traveled a lot, and that was her one big piece of advice to me. I asked her, these are the sort of questions you ask before they go. Hopefully, you have a chance to. And this was one that we asked her. What would be your big piece of advice? And she said, travel as much as you can. So trying to do that more. Obviously, we haven't been able to do that for the last few years. I've snuck in a few trips here and there. You wear masks everywhere you go, but now things maybe are going to settle down. Hopefully, well, other concerns on the horizon now, but whatever. We're going to try to travel. Of course, certain areas of the world you can travel to, and some you can't. But I'll try to leave the politics and all that off this channel. In any case, travel as much as you can. She's not here anymore to say that, so I'm saying that for her. But yeah. So yeah, to Greece one of these days. It also reminds me. I'm not sure if I had I think I showed them in a previous video, but I had bookmarks from Greek philosophers from that same trip, or maybe another trip. And they knew, she knew I was into philosophy and things like that. So I had one for Plato, for Aristotle, for Socrates. I think there was even one for Aristophanes, and we talked about that way back when, a few videos ago. Anyway, the parodies, the plays, the Aristophanes is clouds parodying Socrates, but that's a whole other thing. Today we're moving right along into good territory now. So we're past the either or stage, which is really like one of the famous works of Kierkegaard's lifetime. I think that is indeed the most popular thing in his lifetime, the thing he was known for. When people made fun of him in the street, they called him, like either or. This is coming on a little longer. He's going to have a spat with the newspaper, and then it's going to be uncomfortable for him to walk around in the street without people taunting him. But they'll remember him for those books. So we made good progress through that, and those were pretty jam packed. So we're in not I don't want to say lighter territory, but we can maybe take it a little easier now. But then the first thing you pick up in chronological order. I just have the dust jacket here, but it's 18 Upbuilding Discourse. Oh, can I hold on here? Okay, there we go. 18 Upbuilding Discourses, and oh my gosh, this is a lot to go through, and all of these are pretty dense. Like, each one has their own sort of theme. So I think, at least starting out, I'm just gonna start with the first one, and really going through in chronological order. Which means we're only going to do about 3 before we get to Fear and Trembling. So this is a kind of a compilation of a lot of discourses that Kierkegaard published during his lifetime. They're kind of really like sermons, but he wasn't an ordained minister or anything like that. So these are kind of like unofficial sermons. Although it should be said, and I don't quite understand why, he did give some sermons in some churches. I don't know, like as a guest preacher. I'm not sure how that works, but these are things that he wrote down. I'm not sure if he delivered any of these, actually. I don't know that, but this was meant for, this was published in his own name. Started as 2 Upbuilding Discourses, and he published it after either or and before Fear and Trembling and Repetition. The third one that we're going to go through was published simultaneously with Fear and Trembling and Repetition, also under his name, and the other ones under pseudonyms. So it kind of gives the sense of, this one guy can't be writing all of this. This must be other authors. Fear and Trembling and Repetition, and then this Upbuilding Discourses. Like, he was doing that to sort of throw people off the scent, to That's part of his distancing with his works, but we're not there yet. So we're going to start with these two upbuilding discourses. And actually, for this video, I'm going to narrow it down even further. We're going to do the very first one. And all of these are really nice, actually, like really encapsulated. You could probably read, you could easily read them in one sitting, which is really nice, especially for Kierkegaard, because he's very prolix. A lot of his works just go on and on and on. It's hard to find a good stopping point. But I like the way these are set up, and all of these start with a prayer, which is nice. This first one is called the Expectancy of Faith, and it's all about New Year's Day. So it's all about looking forward to the future, and this idea of faith is tied to the future and expectancy in the future. And it's the verse that this is based on is actually, I think all of these are set up like this, but it's a Bible verse. It's Paul's letter to the Galatians, chapter 3, verse 23 to the end of the chapter. So I'll read that to set up the context. And I read a little bit before too, just to introduce. So Paul, but Paul is his mission is to go to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews of the world, and to preach the message. And there's this controversy, it's like how much there's existing Jews who have converted to Christianity. People who explain that will explain it way better than me, but essentially there's an idea that there's this old, the covenant, the Jewish covenant, and it's like, well, when you have the new Romans or the new Gentiles and the new non-Jews who, they decide to convert and they believe in Jesus, do they follow that old covenant and the old rituals of the old Jewish laws and things like that? And Paul's answer is basically like, no. What has replaced it is basically faith. Faith brings us all together, and there's no need for that old covenant. It's kind of like a new covenant, or I believe that's where the word like New Testament comes. Testament, I think it implies covenant, but I could be wrong there. But let me just read out. So this is Galatians chapter 3, verse 23 to the end, just to set up the context for Kierkegaard's, what do they call this? The discourse, the upbuilding discourses. So this is Paul speaking. Now before faith came, we were imprisoned and guarded under the law until faith would be revealed. Therefore the law was our disciplinarian until Christ came, so that we might be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer subject to a disciplinarian. For in Christ Jesus you are all children of God through faith. As many of you as were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male and female. For all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise. So that sets it up. This is important. Faith is the guiding thing now. This is the new way to do things. That's pretty crucial. So what is this faith, and what is it? Kierkegaard is talking about it, and he says, well, it's New Year's Day. It's a good time to talk about this because we're looking forward, and faith is kind of an expectancy, is kind of looking forward. And there's a contrast on page 17. Again, the page numbers are the original page numbers, not in this edition specifically. But the page 17, there's a contrast between things of this world versus faith. And page 18, I think an interesting thing that he's brought up before, that faith is accessible to everyone. You don't have to be clever to have faith. But in things of this world, there's things that you can be clever at, and people are better than others at. Some are better at practicing law, at doing business, doing all sorts of worldly pursuits. But faith isn't really about that. It's something that talent is not really a consideration here. And as we'll learn later on too, like education is not really a component in this, which gets into a little of the mysticism in it, and points where you may well disagree, and maybe rightly, depending on where you're coming from. But yeah, there's an idea Um, oh, actually, in page 19, it says you can't be educated into faith. So yeah, you can wish for lots of things for people that other people would become rich, and you can help them do that by giving them money, or you can give them things. Faith is not kind of one of these things that we can give to another person. We can't teach someone so much that they'll become educated into faith. It sort of takes their own initiative, and it takes something a little more special. It can't be given to another person. It says on page 21. And what is faith? It turns out in faith, it's the only power that can conquer the future, which is an interesting way. This is very Kierkegaardian, talking about past, present, and future again. But what does this mean? It's a victory over the future. So this is all setting it up. Also, like page 19, I thought it was interesting, talking about anxiety already, which he's going to write a whole book about this eventually, but he just sort of mentions in passing, well, anxiety is like a form of wishing, but faith is kind of similar to it. It's like it's an expectancy. It's like wishing for something in the future. But what is that? Is it something particular? It turns out not to be anything really in particular. It's just the expectancy of victory. So what does that mean? Well, let's try to flesh it out more and look through it more. Um, so page 24, I like that he mentions again past, present, and future. It's important to have all of those in a human being. To become strong is to conquer the future through having that faith. Again, he contrasts that it's important for a human being to have that past, present, and future. He contrasts it with just having, like an animal just has a moment. And if you remember in Either or, the previous books, he talks about, you could just be a plant and live in the moment, but you're not a really human being. To be a human being, you need that continuity. You need that past, present, and the future. So this is coming up again, but more so a focus on the future and that expectancy of faith. Um, Interesting thoughts. I'm just highlighting things that stood out to me as interesting. Page 25, talking about struggles with enemies, and there's a lot of this struggle in the world. Turns out the greatest struggle might be just the struggle with the self, which is interesting. Kierkegaard is really talking about like psychology and thinking of battling your own inner demons and things like that. Really, just at the time when psychology was just getting started, and it was very nascent at the time. I think it was around, but it was nascent. Kierkegaard was making pretty far advances for his time, talking about like, yeah, you got all these enemies in the world. Actually, your biggest enemy is yourself. Like that seems pretty shocking. Maybe I'm not sure how it was received at the time. I like this on page 26. He's talking about faith is really the eternal power in a human being. And again, the expectancy of faith is victory over the future. And it actually reflects back into the present, because we live in present moments, moment to moment, right? With anticipation of the future, with an expectation in the future. But that victory, that expectation of victory over the future gives us a confidence in the present, which I love. And then he kind of goes a little bit down, which into a topic where I think he has a lot of experience dealing with just sorrow and depression and things like that. And he's talking about a very depressed person who has learned a lot. He talks about on page 26, the person who has learned a lot of lessons from the school of sorrow. It sounds kind of cheesy, but it's just sort of like, this is a person who's lived a long time. They've had a lot of expectations and had a lot of disappointments, and I think that's a common thing, especially as you approach midlife or maybe later life. Like, you just kind of get used to being disappointed. It's like, yeah, you had those great hopes, but they didn't really pan out, right? It made me think of that too, reading a lot of this too. I remember a lot of early prayers I had, praying to God for specific things, or for him to do things like, and sometimes in a bad way, like almost challenging. God, if you exist, then you'll grant me just this one prayer, and if it happens, then I'll know you exist, and I'll love you forever. Like a really, like looking back, just like kind of cringeworthy. But that's where I was at that point in life. But I think a lot of life is set up like that. You have, especially early on, you have a lot of those expectations, and then you live through a lot of the disappointments, and it can be where you're like, I'm a student of the school of sorrow. And he really talks about this person who's so downtrodden that the troubled person just expects no victory. That's the difference, actually. There's no expectation of victory. There's kind of like, it's kind of like an Eeyore type personality from Winnie the Pooh, where it's just like, oh, like everything sucks. Like, I might as well not even have expectations, or I'll just assume the worst of everyone and everything. To be honest, I've been here a lot recently, actually, where it's just sort of like you just reach rock bottom and you're kind of like, I don't expect anything good to happen in the future. Actually, I expect most things to turn out not so good. And then the way I like to look at it is like, okay, maybe this will give me a good perspective. And when the good things happen, I'll be so excited and I'll take it as such a miracle and such a blessing. And I think that's kind of an interesting way, but it's sort of like maybe not appropriate, Kierkegaard is talking about like this person is like a person who expects no victory. So really they have no faith. What is it to have faith? I love on page 27. I'm going to quote it because I liked it. It said it very succinctly, what I just said. 27. The man of experience frowns on the behavior of both of these. If one has almost every good one could wish for, then one ought to be prepared to have troubles in life. Visit also the home of the happy. If one has lost everything, then one ought to consider that time reserves many a priceless cure for the sick soul, that the future, like a fond mother, also hides good gifts. In happiness one ought to be prepared to a certain degree for unhappiness, in unhappiness to a certain degree for happiness. Life is going to be somewhat of a mixture of unhappiness and happiness. And you have to kind of expect both of them, and I thought this was great on page. Hold on, I skipped over a few. Having more experience just engenders more doubt in general. So it seems to be like it's harder to have faith as time goes on because more of this bad stuff is happening to you. So experience kind of teaches you not to expect. Your wishes won't be fulfilled. You will be disappointed in life. This is the teacher of experience at the school of sorrow, which is the cheesy way he put it, but it's really true, right? You have a lot of that experience, and now he talks about doubt. Like doubt is really like the challenger to faith, right? But the wrong way to approach this is to bear the pain silently, or doubt from outside really doesn't disturb the expectancy of faith. So faith versus doubt. For a person who has faith, these doubts can creep in, but doubt bears the pain silently, which I'm not super sure I completely understand that, because that implies, okay, if you should bear the pain not silently if you have faith. I'm not sure I understand that, but let's move on. You can read it for yourself. Maybe you'd understand it more than I could. And then what I alluded to before, page 29, faith is not the expectation of something in particular. So we're talking about all these other times when maybe my past life or my past self wishing for something. I'm wishing for a thing, an object, a person, or things like that. Like those are all very particular wants. But faith is not the expectation of anything in particular. And then it's implied but not said right out that it's okay. Faith is the expectation of something just in general. And in general, what is that? It's victory. I love this. because he's also saying I'm on this path myself. I haven't perfected it. I'm still a doubter sometimes. It seems like he's saying. Um, so page 32. Uh, but one is finished with the future only by conquering it. But this is precisely what faith does, since its expectancy is victory. Every time I catch my soul not expecting victory, I know that I do not have faith. So he's saying, I'm struggling with this myself. I'm not perfect. I'm figuring out how to deal with this. Um, and I love this on page 20 or page 33. It's kind of the harsh reality, but I'm not going to quote it directly. But he's saying the person who has faith demands no substantiation of his expectancy. What does that mean? Well, I wish for a car and I don't get the car. Like, that is not the appropriate way. Like, it's not even I want a car or something like that. I think it's something, something more substantial than that. But really, like, when you're talking about substantial, you're talking about I want it to actually happen, to materialize in the future. I want this event to happen. I want this circumstance. I want to be comfortable. But the person who has faith isn't going to expect that. There's going to be like, okay, how do you have that? Like, you have that expectancy of victory of something, but you don't have that. You don't necessarily think that it'll come true. If it does, then great. But if it doesn't, you still have that faith. That is a struggle, right? I don't think there's a good answer to that or way to reason through that. And I love this, like, faith expects an eternity. In another part, he mentioned really faith is like the eternal element in a human being. And in other works, he talks about a human being kind of a synthesis between the finite and the infinite. And there's elements of the eternal. There's elements of the finite. That is one element, like a human being having faith. There's a little element of infinity or eternality in a person. And then just closing off here, just generally, the expectancy of faith will not be disappointed. So there's an implication there that even if it doesn't materialize, if there's no substantiation, as they said before, the expectancy of faith just keeps on being, okay with it. It's not disappointed. It's like, okay, there's that hope for victory, but you wait and it didn't materialize, but there's still the faith there, and there's still the expectation of victory. So that's a struggle, and that's the struggle of faith. I think this was great, and I love this, like, bite size. This is really like bite-sized pieces, which is perfect for this series. But yeah, I think it sets us up nice, and I really can see where it's placed in Kierkegaard's works, because I have read Fear and Trembling before. I haven't read these discourses yet, but I've read Fear and Trembling, so I know this is where he's leading. This is his frame of thought. The verse that he referenced actually referenced Abraham, which is the main character of Fear and Trembling, Abraham and Isaac. But it's struggling with this this idea of faith, this thing that can't be rationed, you can't be educated on it, it can't be rationalized, and then an idea of also like there is an idea of he doesn't say it directly, but there's these ideas of the single and the double movement, which are definitely going to be in Fear and Trembling. But the single movement is like that extremely depressed person that I talked about, who's hit rock bottom and has no expectancy that things are going to happen, things are going to get better. That's the single movement, right? But we should push towards the double movement, which is like Abraham, he's going to say. And Abraham is going to say, okay, I'm going to go through, I'm depressed. Oh, I have to sacrifice my son, which is a big deal, just to put it, way too bluntly. But, it's interesting there, because there's kind of a paradox, because he's going to sacrifice his son, but he has every expectation that things are going to be better, that he's going to get his son in the end. Beyond all reason, he really thinks he's going to sacrifice his son, and he's going to get him back at the same time. Like, that's a paradox. It doesn't make any sense. There's no rationality in that. but that is the double movement, right? And it's like, it's just like this, the expectancy of faith. That's what it is. It's that I haven't resigned that everything is going to go bad and I'm not going to get everything. I've resigned, in a sense, resigned to the world, but I'm expecting victory. What does that mean in those different contexts? And victory in the Abrahamic context is I'm going to get my son back. You know, it's going to be a miracle or something's going to happen, but I know I have that expectancy of faith. So this is getting a little farther ahead, but I think it's a nice transition point because I'm thinking about these already, and there's definitely hints of that. And I already mentioned that the verse that we quoted at the beginning mentions Abraham. It's starting to set up the context, but we're not there yet. So we have two more discourses, really. Well, we have one more that's going to come in the two upbuilding discourses, and then one that's going to be published simultaneously, as I said before. So we'll see which one I get to first. But we're on the path to fear and trembling, which is another pretty momentous milestone in Kierkegaard's journey. So we're not there yet, but join me again for another upbuilding discourse. And thank you again for tuning in. I really appreciate your time, and I hope this helped, and I hope you got something out of it. And I encourage you to get this and read it for yourself because it's quite short. Very, very different than Kierkegaard's other works. Really is bite-sized, so it's perfect for just sitting down for some reading for the evening or so. So I encourage you to seek it out on your own, and you will probably pick up things I didn't and all that. That's good. That's why people think differently, and we have this is how I received it. Anyway, join me next time. So thank you again, and I'll see you next time. So long.